My son was going to marry the most charming woman I had ever distrusted. That's the truth I kept to myself for nearly a year. Everyone else in our family thought Amber was wonderful. My sister called her radiant. My neighbor Margaret, who had watched my son grow up from a gap-toothed 8-year-old to a 29-year-old high school history teacher, told me at a block party that I had better not mess this one up. Even my late wife's sister, Patricia, who had never warmed to anyone quickly, sent me a text after meeting Amber for the first time that said simply, "She's the one, James. Don't overthink it. I am 63 years old. I have spent 40 of those years learning to read rooms, read contracts, and read people. When you spend 3 decades as an architect, you understand that the most beautiful facades often conceal the worst structural problems. Cracks in load-bearing walls, rot behind fresh paint, a foundation that looks solid from the street and crumbles the moment any real weight is placed on it. Amber had a beautiful facade. She came into our lives on a Wednesday evening in late February, when my son brought her to my house in Portland for dinner. He had been dating her for about 6 weeks at that point, long enough that he was nervous and grinning in that particular way he has when something matters to him. I had made pot roast, which was my son's favorite meal since childhood and something I made deliberately whenever I wanted a person to feel at home. She walked through my front door in a pale blue dress that was perfectly calibrated between casual and impressive, and she looked at my living room the way a contractor looks at a property he is about to appraise. Quick eyes, efficient. She smiled before she looked at me, which meant the smile was already in place when she turned toward my face. That is the kind of detail that sounds paranoid when you say it out loud. But I noticed it. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "I've heard so much about you. Daniel talks about you constantly." "Just James," I told her. "And welcome." She shook my hand. Her grip was exactly right, not too firm, not too soft, the kind of handshake you practice. Over dinner, she was wonderful company, smart, funny, genuinely interested in my son in a way that appeared real. She asked about his students, remembered details he had mentioned to her weeks before, laughed at his jokes. She asked me thoughtful questions about my career. I had retired 3 years earlier after selling my architecture firm, Callaway Design Group, to a regional developer. I described myself the way I always did in casual conversation, a retired architect, mostly just taking it easy, traveling when I feel like it. "You must have built some beautiful things," she said. "A few," I said. "I got lucky with the right clients." She smiled. "Luck and talent together. That's a rare combination." It was a perfectly pleasant thing to say. It was also, I would realize later, the first time she assessed me. I watched her eyes move once across my living room, the bookshelves, the art, the view through the back windows toward the Willamette River, before returning to my face. A quick inventory. She thought she was being subtle. She was not. After they left that night, I sat in my kitchen with a glass of bourbon and wrote 3 things on a notepad. First, her handbag was a $2,400 Bottega Veneta. Teachers don't buy those on Daniel's salary. Second, she asked about my firm twice, without directly asking what it sold for. Third, she looked at the Hendrix painting above the mantel, like she was calculating its resale value. I tore the notepad paper into small pieces and threw it away. I did not want to be the kind of father who built a case against his son's girlfriend based on a first impression. Daniel was happy. He had been through a difficult stretch. After his mother passed, she died of an aneurysm 4 years ago, sudden and devastating, and he had closed himself off for a long time after that. Amber was the first person who had reached him since. I told myself to be patient. I was also not entirely passive. I had a friend named Carol Whitman who ran a security consulting firm out of Seattle. We had worked together years ago when I was building corporate campuses and needed background screening for contractors. She was meticulous, ethical, and entirely discreet. I called her on a Thursday morning 2 weeks after that dinner. "I need you to look into someone for me quietly," I said. "Probably nothing, but I want to know." Carol said she would be careful. I gave her Amber's name and the name of her wellness coaching business, which had about 600,000 followers on Instagram and claimed to generate income through brand partnerships and online courses. I told myself I was just being thorough. 3 months later, My son called me on a Sunday afternoon and told me Amber had said yes. I kept my voice exactly right. Warm. Enthusiastic. That's wonderful, son. I'm so happy for you. I want you to be my best man, Dad. I wouldn't miss it for anything. I hung up and sat very still for a long time. Carol's preliminary report had already come in. It was not alarming on its own. Amber's wellness business was generating less income than her Instagram suggested. The courses were not selling well, and several brand partnerships had ended over the past year. She had significant credit card debt, roughly $80,000 spread across 4 accounts. Her apartment in Seattle was shared with a man named Derek Holloway, whom she listed publicly as her cousin and business manager. Debt and a struggling business were not crimes. A lot of people in their late 20s were carrying that kind of weight. I had made my share of financial mistakes at that age. I told Carol to keep looking. The engagement party was held at my house in April. 60 people crowded into my living room and backyard, and Amber moved through them like she had been born to the room. She remembered everyone's names after being introduced once. She touched my son's arm when she talked about their future. She told a story about the two of them getting caught in a rainstorm during a hike and laughing until they couldn't breathe. And everyone in earshot smiled. Her cousin Derek arrived about an hour in. He was 32 or 33, with an easy manner and expensive shoes, and he found me within 10 minutes of walking through the door. "James," he said, "like we were old friends. I've been looking forward to meeting you. Amber talks about you all the time." We shook hands. His eyes did the same quick inventory Amber's had done at dinner. The art, the view, the layout of the house. "Beautiful place," he said. "Great bones. You have an eye for space." 40 years as an architect, I said. Right. Retired now, Amber said. "Living the dream," he laughed. I have to say, I envy that. I've been trying to get Amber to think more long-term about her business, building something she can step back from eventually. It's hard to convince her. He paused. "Speaking of long-term thinking, do you have a financial advisor you like? I've been getting into some interesting alternative investments, and I'm always looking for people who think differently about money." I told him I had a good advisor and was comfortable with my current portfolio. He nodded like I had said something slightly disappointing. "Smart to be conservative," he said, "though sometimes the real opportunities are in the places people aren't looking." He excused himself to get a drink. I watched him go. That night, I called Carol and told her to look at Derek as well. The wedding planning began in June. My son sat across from me at the same coffee shop where we had been meeting since he was in graduate school, looking simultaneously happy and embarrassed. "Dad, I hate to bring this up," he said, "but Amber's dream venue is Harborview Terrace." He showed me their website on his phone, an event space on the Portland waterfront. They were charging $60,000 for the rental alone. "Total budget," he said carefully, "is probably around $130,000. I can put in 30. Amber can contribute maybe 15 from her business account." He set his phone down. "I was hoping you might help with some of it." I looked at my son. He had never asked me for money before in his adult life. He had taken out his own student loans, driven used cars, and refused even small checks I had offered at Christmas. This was the first time. "You love her?" I asked. "More than I've ever loved anyone," he said. "She makes me feel like myself again, Dad. Like after Mom died, I forgot who I was. Amber brought me back. I paid the venue deposit the following week. Over the next several months, I also covered the catering, the flowers, the photography, and the honeymoon trip to Costa Rica. The final total was just over $112,000. Amber sent a thank you note on nice stationery that said how grateful they both were and how much she looked forward to being part of our family. It was signed in a looping, practiced hand. Carol's full report arrived on a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks before the wedding. I poured myself coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and read it twice. Amber had been engaged once before, to a 47-year-old contractor in Sacramento named Philip Garrett. The engagement lasted 11 months. When it ended, Philip had liquidated a significant portion of his retirement savings to cover what he described to Carol's contact as shared business opportunities Amber and Derek had presented to him. The breakup had come after Philip's adult daughter hired a private investigator and confronted Amber directly, A non-disclosure agreement had been signed. Philip had tried to warn people online afterward and been threatened with legal action. Derek had 2 civil judgments against him in California for fraud involving a real estate investment group. He had declared bankruptcy in 2019 and rebuilt his finances quickly enough afterward that it warranted attention. But the worst part was the pattern Carol had documented in Amber's financial records. Every time her account received a large deposit, every time she extracted money from Philip, every time a brand partnership paid out, a significant portion moved within days to an LLC registered in Nevada with no public-facing business activity. The LLC's registered agent was Derek Holloway. I sat with the folder for a long time. Outside my window, the river was silver in the morning light. I thought about my son's face at the coffee shop. She brought me back. I thought about the kind of person who would look at a grieving man and see opportunity. I thought about what happened to Philip Garrett's retirement savings. I thought about the fact that Amber did not know who I was. This is the part of the story that requires some explanation. When I sold Callaway Design Group 3 years ago, the transaction was valued at $14 million. After taxes and fees, I took home a little over $9 million. My investment portfolio, combined with real estate and other assets, has grown since then to somewhere around $11 million. I live in a modest house, drive a 7-year-old Subaru, make my own coffee, and shop at the same grocery store I have been using for 20 years. My son knew I had sold the business. He did not know what it sold for, because I had never told him. I did not want the money to change the way he lived his life or the way he saw himself. His mother and I had agreed on that before she passed. Amber had done her research, clearly. She had found what there was to find, publicly. A retired architect, a house in Portland with a river view, some modest-seeming assets, a comfortable but unremarkable life. She had missed the rest entirely. I picked up the phone and called Carol. I need everything compiled. Documents, photographs, court records, everything Philip Garrett is willing to share. I need it ready by the morning of the rehearsal dinner. Carol was quiet for a moment. James, are you sure about how you want to handle this? Not entirely, I said. But I'm sure I won't do nothing. That night I also called my attorney, a woman named Sandra Howell, whom I had worked with for 15 years. I explained the situation and told her what I was considering. She asked me 3 careful questions and then said she would be there. The rehearsal dinner was held at a waterfront restaurant in the Pearl District on a Friday evening in late October. 90 guests, white tablecloths and candlelight, and the kind of warm, glowing atmosphere that makes everything feel inevitable. My son was in a navy suit, and he looked like his mother's son in a way that made my chest ache. Amber was in an ivory dress, her dark hair pulled back, laughing with her bridesmaids across the room. Derek was at the bar with a glass of something amber-colored, watching the room with the quiet attention of someone who is always calculating something. I was standing near the windows, looking out at the river when my son appeared at my side. He had come quickly, cutting through the crowd, and there was something wrong in his face, a color that wasn't quite right, a tightness around the eyes that I recognized because I had seen it in mirrors. He gripped my arm just above the elbow. "Dad," he said. His voice was low, almost nothing. "I need to tell you something. Right now." I set my glass on the windowsill. "Let's step outside." We found a quiet spot on the far end of the terrace, away from the outdoor heaters and the other guests. The city lights reflected on the water below us. My son pulled his phone from his pocket with shaking hands. "I borrowed Amber's laptop last week to print some lesson plans. Mine was at the shop." He stopped, steadied himself. "Tonight, I got an alert from my cloud storage. Someone accessed it from Amber's IP address this morning. Her home network." He looked at the phone. I checked the access logs. She went through everything. My financial records, my tax returns, my contacts list. "Dad, she searched your name. She searched Callaway Design Group sale price." My blood went cold, but my face stayed still. I had spent 40 years in rooms where someone was always trying to get the upper hand. You learn to hold your face. "Show me," I said. He turned the phone toward me. The access log was clear. 37 minutes of activity, methodical, organized. She had gone through his files in a way that suggested she knew what she was looking for. "There's more," he said. His voice cracked on the second word. "She left her email open on my laptop. I wasn't going to look. I swear I wasn't going to look." He exhaled. But the subject line was open and it said, "Derek." And "You looked," I said. "It's all right." It was a thread with Derek from 2 days ago. He read from his phone, his voice flat and careful the way people speak when they are holding themselves together through pure effort. She wrote, "Confirmed the firm sold for 14. He's worth at least 10 by now, probably more. Dad's completely blind. Daniel has no idea." Derek wrote back, "Phase 2 starts after the honeymoon. Power of appointment for finances while he's traveling. Frame it as just being helpful." My son stopped. He could not read the next part out loud, so he handed me the phone. I read Derek's final message in the thread. "What if old man pushes back?" And Amber's response. "He's 63 and alone. Daniel trusts me completely. We won't need to push hard." I handed the phone back to my son. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The city hummed below us. Inside, someone laughed at something, and the sound floated out through the glass. "I'm sorry," my son said. "Dad, I am so sorry. I brought her into our family. I should have—" I put my hand on his shoulder. "Stop. You did not do anything wrong. You love someone who told you a story. That is not your failure." I held his gaze until he steadied. "Do you trust me?" He nodded once, without hesitation. "Then go back inside. Be yourself. Get through tonight. Tomorrow morning, let me handle what comes next." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "You have a plan." "I've had one since February," I said. I made 3 phone calls that night after I returned to my hotel room. The first was to Carol. I told her to send everything she had to Sandra by 7 in the morning. Philip Garrett's documentation, the LLC records, the civil judgments, all of it. She said it would be done. The second was to Sandra. I told her to be at the venue by 9. She asked what she should prepare for. I told her she would be watching me stop a wedding, and that I would need her close when things became complicated. She said, "I'll bring Marcus from the firm as well. You'll want a witness." The third call was to a man named Robert Ellison, a business journalist at the Portland Tribune who had covered the sale of my firm 3 years earlier. We had stayed in loose contact. I told him I had a story not about me specifically, but about a fraud scheme I had documentation for, and that if he could be at Harborview Terrace by 11 in the morning, I would give him everything. He asked why I was choosing now. "Because some things should be on the record," I said, "so they can't be hidden again." I did not sleep much. I sat at the hotel desk in the dark and thought about Philip Garrett, whom I had spoken to briefly on the phone after Carol made the introduction. He had a daughter in college. He was still rebuilding. His voice, when he talked about what had happened to him, had a particular quality, not bitterness exactly, but the careful flatness of someone who had stopped expecting to be believed. He had told me she was very good at what she did. I keep thinking I should have seen it, but she was very, very good. I thought about what it cost a person to be that good at deceiving someone who loved them, what you had to hollow out in yourself to do it year after year, target after target, moving on when the money was gone and the damage was done. I thought about my son's face when he read those messages. I thought about my wife, who had been the most genuinely kind person I had ever known, and about the way she had trusted people completely and been right almost every time, and about how she would have handled this situation. She would have been heartbroken for Daniel. She would have been furious in her quiet, devastating way. And then she would have said, "James, don't make it worse than it has to be, but don't let it go either." It doesn't have to be worse than it has to be, I thought, but it cannot go. The morning of the wedding, I arrived at Harborview Terrace at 8:30. My son was already there, standing in the parking lot in his dress shirt and slacks, hands in his pockets, looking at the river. He had not slept either, I could tell, but he had a steadiness about him that I recognized. The same steadiness his mother had in difficult moments, the ability to know what was coming and still stand upright in it. "She texted me this morning," he said when I reached him. "Good morning, beautiful. Today's the day." Heart emoji. "That's how it works," I said. The performance doesn't stop until there's no reason to keep it up. Sandra arrived at 9 with her colleague. Carol had sent 3 secured files by that point. We set up in a small back office near the catering entrance, spreading documents across a table. Philip Garrett's signed affidavit, the LLC registration records, the civil judgments, the financial transfer patterns. Sandra reviewed everything with the focused attention she brought to every situation that mattered. "This is enough," she said. "This is more than enough." "Is it enough to stop what they were planning?" I asked. "With the paper trail to the Nevada LLC and Philip's testimony, the DA will take a call," she said. "That's separate from today. But yes, this is significant." Guests began arriving at 10. I watched from just inside the entrance as Harborview filled up colleagues of my son's from his school, family from my wife's side, old friends who had driven up from California and down from Seattle, people who had come to see a joyful thing happen. Amber appeared at 10:20 in a wedding dress that was genuinely beautiful. She looked radiant in the way that people who are fully committed to a performance always look radiant. Her bridesmaids surrounded her, and she moved through the room accepting congratulations and embraces with the ease of someone who had done this before. Because she had. She spotted my son across the room and her whole face lit up. She pressed her fingertips to her lips and blew him a kiss. He smiled back. His hands did not tremble. I was proud of him in a way I did not have words for. Derek arrived separately, and within moments of entering, he had positioned himself near the rear exit close to the door, with clear sight lines to the main entrance. The posture of someone who has planned an escape before. At 10:50, I walked to the front of the ceremony space. The officiant, a cheerful man who had met with my son and Amber twice, was adjusting his notes. The string quartet was playing something warm and anticipatory. 110 people had settled into chairs arranged in white rows on the terrace, facing a floral arch over the waterfront railing with the river silver and wide behind it. I asked the officiant to hold for a moment. He looked uncertain. "Is everything all right?" "It will be," I said. I took the wireless microphone from the stand beside the podium. My son stood at the front of the aisle, waiting for me, watching me. He gave me one small nod. "May I have everyone's attention, please?" The room settled. Amber was at the far end of the aisle, her father's arm through hers, her bouquet in her hands. When she heard my voice, she turned. Her smile flickered for just a fraction of a second and then reassembled itself perfectly. "My name is James Calloway. I'm Daniel's father and his best man." I paused to let the room quiet fully. "I have an announcement to make before this ceremony begins, and I need to ask for your patience." "What is this?" Amber's voice was carefully modulated, confused, not frightened. The sound of someone who is still deciding how to play a scene. "Daniel, what's happening?" My son turned to face her from the front of the aisle. "I think you already know what's happening, Amber." Her composure held. She took 2 steps forward. "Honey, your father looks upset. Maybe we should talk privately." "There's nothing to discuss privately," I said. "That can't be said here." I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and removed a folded document. "I want to be straightforward with everyone. My son and I discovered last night that this wedding is not what it appears to be." Murmurs moved through the seated guests. Amber's father, a quiet man from Spokane named Gerald, who had driven down yesterday and seemed genuinely fond of my son, dropped his daughter's arm and stepped back. "Amber." Derek's voice came from somewhere near the back. "Amber, let's—" "Please stay where you are," Sandra said, moving into the aisle from the side door. "I'm Sandra Howell, Mr. Calloway's attorney. We have documentation I'd like the room to be aware of before anyone goes anywhere." Derek moved toward the exit anyway. 2 men I had seated near the rear for exactly this reason stood as he approached. One was my friend, Walt Morrison, who had played college football at Oregon State and still moved like it. The other was Philip Garrett, who had driven up from Sacramento because he deserved to be present for this. Derek stopped. "I'm going to tell you who I am," I said into the microphone. "For the past 3 years, I've described myself as a retired architect. That's true, as far as it goes." I looked out at the assembled room, friends, family, people who had no idea what was happening and deserved an explanation. 30 years ago, I founded a firm called Callaway Design Group. We built hospitals, schools, libraries, corporate campuses across the Pacific Northwest. In 2021, I sold that firm for $14 million. After taxes, my net worth today is approximately $11 million. I live modestly, drive a used car, and never told my son the specific numbers because I wanted him to build his own life without the weight of it. I have spent 3 years being careful about who knows what I am actually worth. The room was completely silent. Amber found out anyway, I said. She accessed my son's private financial records from his cloud storage yesterday morning without his knowledge or consent. She shared what she found with her cousin Derek. I held up my phone, which Carol had remotely loaded with the relevant text thread. I'm going to read you what she wrote. Amber made her move then. She let the bouquet drop and walked forward quickly, her voice suddenly urgent and almost musical with distress. He's lying, everyone. I don't know what documentation he thinks he has, but this is not real. Daniel, please, tell them. Your father has been against us from the beginning. He never wanted this. My son crossed the aisle and stood beside me. Dad, give me the phone. I handed it to him. He read the text thread aloud. Every word. His voice was steady and quiet and absolutely devastating in its calm. The room listened. By the time he reached phase 2 starts after the honeymoon, 3 people in the guest rows had audibly gasped. By power of appointment for finances while he's traveling, Amber's mother had put her face in her hands. Those messages were taken out of context, Amber said. Her voice was still controlled, but something at its edge had changed. Derek and I were talking about helping Daniel manage finances after the wedding. It's not what it sounds like. The man, standing by the back wall, I said, is named Philip Garrett. He is from Sacramento. He would like to say something. Philip walked to the front of the room. He was a compact, careful man in his 50s, with silver at his temples and the expression of someone who had been waiting a long time for a room to be quiet enough to hear him. My name is Philip Garrett, he said. 2 years ago, I was engaged to Amber Reeves. I want you to know what happened after that. He spoke for 4 minutes. He was not dramatic about it. He was simply accurate. He described the investment opportunities Derek had presented, the emergency loans Amber had needed, the way his retirement account had been drawn down in increments small enough to seem reasonable until suddenly it was not. He described signing the NDA because by that point he was ashamed and exhausted and just wanted it to stop. He described rebuilding. When he finished, Amber's father turned to his daughter, Vicky. He used a name I hadn't heard before, a childhood name, something private and painful. Is this true? Amber did not answer. Her composure had fractured in a way that was not a performance. The woman underneath was visible for a moment younger, frightened, something close to cornered. I never meant, she began. There's documentation of 2 civil fraud judgments against Derek Holloway in California, Sandra said, stepping forward. There is a registered LLC in Nevada receiving transferred funds from Miss Reeves' accounts following each significant financial extraction. There is a pattern across at least 2 documented cases. We've shared everything with the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office this morning. Amber's attorney, she had not mentioned having one, but one appeared from somewhere near the back, which told me this was not their first time preparing for a moment like this, stepped forward and asked that everyone calm down. Sandra engaged him in a conversation that moved quickly toward the kind of legal vocabulary that ends parties. Derek made a second attempt at the exit. Walt put a hand on his shoulder. Philip Garrett folded his arms and watched. The guests were mostly on their feet now, talking, recording on phones. Amber's mother was crying into a handkerchief. Gerald, her father, stood very still in the way that people stand when the ground has shifted and they haven't decided yet how to move. I felt sorry for him. He had not known. The police arrived at 11:20. I had called them the night before, as a precaution, and asked them to be nearby. When they walked in, Derek finally stopped moving toward exits. My son and I stood at the front of the room together and watched it all unfold. He did not say anything for a long time. Then he said, "She really loved the waterfront. She loved what she thought the waterfront would get her," I said. "Is there a difference?" There's all the difference in the world. The next several hours were what you might expect. Statements. Amber's attorney trying to control a situation that had long since left the realm of control. Guests peeling away in small groups, some horrified, some unable to stop watching. The caterers, to their credit, left the food out, and people ate, because that is what people do when they don't know what else to do. Robert Ellison arrived from the Tribune, and I gave him a brief statement. I told him the full story would follow in the coming weeks, when I had more time and the legal matters had settled. He was already on his phone filing something before he reached his car. My son and I drove home in my Subaru as the afternoon light turned the river gold. Neither of us talked for a while. The radio played something I didn't recognize, and neither of us changed the station. "She really did bring me back," he finally said. "After Mom, I know what she was. But some part of what I felt was real. Even if none of what she was is real. I need you to know that I know the difference." "I know you do. Why didn't you tell me about the money? All those years." He wasn't accusing me. He was genuinely asking. "Because I wanted you to become a history teacher because you love history and you love teaching, not because you could afford to be something else. I kept my eyes on the road. You're a good man, son. You're kind and trusting. And you think the best of people. I didn't want money to make you suspicious of everything before you had a chance to learn what was worth trusting." He was quiet for a moment. "I might be a little more suspicious now." "Appropriate," I said. "Not permanent." The investigations moved slowly, the way these things do. The Multnomah County DA took Carol's documentation and combined it with what Philip provided and what the Sacramento authorities already had on file. Federal involvement came in when the Nevada LLC and interstate transfers became part of the picture. Amber and Derek were arrested, released, and then rearrested when Derek attempted to liquidate the LLC and transfer the funds offshore. That particular error cost him significantly at sentencing. Sandra ran our civil case with the focused efficiency that had made her indispensable for 15 years. We filed against both of them. We were not optimistic about collecting the assets were largely phantom, but public record has a permanence that matters regardless of recovery. Philip Garrett testified at the preliminary hearing. He was clear and organized, and the judge listened to him carefully. Afterward, he and I had coffee outside the courthouse, and he said, "I thought no one would ever believe me. Because of the NDA. Because of how it looked. Someone believed you," I said. "It just took longer than it should have." He nodded. "Thank you for calling me, for including me in how it ended." "It ended the way it should have started," I said, "with the truth on record." He laughed, short and dry. "You know, she was very good at what she did. I still don't hate her. I just needed it to stop." I thought about that for a long time. 4 months after the canceled wedding, 2 letters arrived in my mailbox on the same day, postmarked from different Oregon correctional facilities. Amber's letter was short. She wrote that she had spent the early weeks of her incarceration furious at me, and that the anger had gradually given way to something she did not have a clean word for. She wrote, "I've been trying to remember when I decided people were resources instead of people. I don't remember deciding it. I think it was slow. I think by the time I met Daniel, I genuinely couldn't tell the difference between what I felt and what I was doing. I'm not sure that's an excuse. Maybe it makes it worse. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to find the difference now. It's harder than I expected." Derek's letter was longer and angrier, and then, near the end, quieter. He wrote about growing up watching their parents' work schemes, how it had seemed like cleverness rather than harm when he was a child. He wrote, "You were the first person who was smarter than us." I don't mean that as a compliment exactly. I mean it as an acknowledgement. We understood money and appearances. We didn't understand someone who had both and didn't care if people knew. I showed both letters to my son. He read them carefully and handed them back. "Are you going to respond?" he asked. "Yes," I said. To Amber, I wrote, "The difference between what you felt and what you were doing is the most important thing you'll ever figure out. I hope you figure it out. The door to our lives is permanently closed. The door to becoming someone different is open, but only you can walk through it." To Derek, I wrote, "Patterns learned in childhood are not destiny. They are starting points. You've had a long time to learn a different way. I hope you use what's left." I did not expect to hear back from either of them. I did not need to. 7 months after the canceled wedding, my son called me on a Sunday afternoon. "I met someone," he said. "At school. She's a librarian. She wants to know if you'd want to have dinner with us sometime. She says she's heard so much about you, but she wants to meet you before she decides if any of it is accurate." I laughed. "I like her already. I thought you might." Her name was Catherine, and she was 41 years old with 200,000 books worth of opinions, and the kind of direct gaze that told you she had spent her career making sure people got what they actually needed rather than what they asked. 4. She came to my house for dinner 3 weeks later and spent 45 minutes in my living room looking at my bookshelves before she looked at my art. She asked about my wife and listened to the answer fully, without rushing toward what came next. She told my son, within earshot of me, that his pot roast was better than mine, which was both untrue and exactly the kind of thing someone secure in herself will say. When they left, Maria, my housekeeper, who had been with me for 22 years, and had watched this entire saga with the expressiveness of someone watching a movie she had predicted from the opening credits, appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Well?" she said. "I liked her," I said. "I know." You smiled with your whole face. She picked up the serving dish. "You haven't done that since Sarah." I thought about that for a while. I thought about a year of watching and waiting. I thought about the calculated patience it had taken to let things move at the right speed rather than the urgent speed, to hold information until the moment it would do the most good, to protect my son without taking away his right to make his own choices and face what they led to. I thought about what the long game actually costs. Not money, not even time. Exactly. It costs the willingness to be uncertain, to stay quiet when every instinct says to speak, to trust that the truth will find its moment if you hold it carefully and don't rush it toward the wrong door. Amber and Derek were sentenced 8 months after their arrests. She received 10 years. He received 7. The Nevada LLC was dissolved by court order. What assets existed went to restitution for Philip and 2 other victims who had come forward after the Tribune story ran. Philip got most of his retirement savings back. Not all, but most. He called to tell me, and his voice had a different quality than it had before. Less careful, less flat. "I didn't think I'd actually see any of it," he said. "You deserve to see all of it," I said. "I'm sorry it took this long." 1 year after the canceled wedding, my son proposed to Catherine at a bookstore in Northeast Portland, where she had her library card from childhood. She said yes. She told me later that he had asked her, during the proposal, if she wanted to know about his financial situation before she answered. She said, "I told him I would have said yes either way, but that I respected him more for asking. The wedding will be small, my backyard, family and close friends. Catherine's parents are driving from Vermont. Her mother has already told my son, via text, that she is looking forward to meeting the father who stopped a wedding with a microphone and that she has questions. I look forward to answering them." On a Wednesday evening in late October, almost exactly a year from the rehearsal dinner, my son and I sat on my back porch as the light went off the water. He had brought a bottle of the same bourbon I keep, and he poured us both a glass without asking, because he has been doing it since he turned 21, and it is one of the small, specific things I love about him. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Always." That night at the rehearsal dinner, when I came to you and told you about the messages, he turned his glass in his hands. "You already knew. You'd been investigating her for months. You had the whole plan in place." He looked at me. "Why did you wait for me to come to you? Why didn't you just tell me what you'd found?" I thought about the answer carefully, because he deserved a careful answer. "Because you needed to see it yourself," I said. "If I had come to you with Carol's report in March, before you'd found anything, you would have had a choice between believing your father and believing the woman you loved. That's not a fair choice to put on anyone." I sipped the bourbon. "But when you came to me, when you found the evidence yourself, you weren't choosing between us anymore. You already knew the truth. You just needed someone to stand beside you while you faced it." He was quiet for a long time. "That's very calculated," he finally said. "Yes," I admitted. "Also," he said, "exactly what Mom would have done." I did not have anything to say to that. The compliment was too large for words. We sat in the comfortable silence that is only possible between people who have been through something hard together and come out on the same side of it. The city lights came on across the water. Somewhere in the neighborhood, someone was grilling something and the smell of it drifted over the fence. My son had survived the worst year of his adult life. He had discovered that someone who claimed to love him had been cataloging him for extraction, and he had stood in a room of 110 people and read the proof aloud in a clear, steady voice. He was going to marry a librarian who had opinions about everything and looked at bookshelves before artwork and asked honest questions and expected honest answers. I was going to have a daughter-in-law who had told me, at our second dinner together, that she had read the Tribune article about what I had done, and that her main reaction had been, he waited a long time before he said anything. That takes more discipline than acting. It does. It takes everything, sometimes. The people who tried to use my quietness against me had mistaken patience for weakness. They had seen a retired man in a modest house with a used car and assumed that what was visible was all there was. They had never considered that someone might choose to be underestimated. That hiding, sometimes, is not fear. Sometimes it is strategy. And sometimes the strategy runs for 15 years, because the thing you are protecting is worth every day of the wait. I have a painting above my mantel that is worth a great deal of money. I have a stamp collection in my office safe that is worth more. I have investment accounts that have grown steadily while I lived quietly and asked for nothing, and let the world assume I was ordinary. I do not need anyone to know these things. They are not the point. The point is sitting beside me on the porch in the October dark, pouring a second glass of bourbon, telling me about a book his fiancée has been making him read, laughing at himself for enjoying it more than he expected to. The point is that he is happy. Genuinely, structurally happy, not the facade of happiness, but the real thing, the kind that holds weight. That is everything I was ever protecting. That is the whole story.